In the shadow of war-torn England, a wealthy man's death in a blitz bombing leaves his young widow, Rosaline, with a fortune and a target on her back. As the greedy Claude family schemes to reclaim their lost inheritance, a mysterious stranger claims the man lives, stirring fear and deceit. When murder strikes twice, Hercule Poirot unravels a web of lies, forged letters, a haunting portrait, and a cryptic word, flood to expose a killer whose ambition drowns all in its path. In 30 seconds, step into a world where no one is innocent, and the truth is a deadly tide. Chapter 1. The Blitz and the Benefactor. The autumn of 1944 hung over London like a shroud, the air thick with the acrid scent of smoke and the distant wail of sirens. The war had carved its mark on every street, and Chelsea, once a haven of elegance, bore the scars of relentless bombings. In a grand townhouse on Chain Walk, Gordon Claude, a widower of 62, had lived in splendid defiance of the chaos. His wealth, amassed through shrewd investments in shipping, had long sustained his sprawling family, siblings, cousins, and in-laws who clung to his generosity like ivy to a wall. But on a fateful October night, a Luftwaffe bomb reduced his home to rubble, and Gordon with it. His body was never found, only fragments of his life scattered among the debris. Miraculously, his new wife Rosaline, a former actress of 26, escaped. She had been at a theater rehearsal in the West End, her delicate frame untouched by the blast that claimed her husband. The news of her survival and her inheritance rippled through the Claude family like a stone cast into a still pond. Gordon's will, rewritten mere months before his death, left everything to Rosaline: the estate, the investments, the very air the Claudes breathed. The family gathered in the cramped drawing room of a modest country house in Wormsley Vale. A quiet village some miles from London, simmered with resentment. The room, with its faded chintz, curtains, and chipped teacups, seemed to mock their diminished status. Jeremy Claude, Gordon's younger brother and a solicitor of pinched demeanor, paced before the hearth. His wife, Frances, sat rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line, as if swallowing words too bitter to speak. Beatrice, Gordon's widowed sister, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting to her son, Lionel, a doctor whose practice teetered on ruin without Gordon's subsidies. Lynn Marchmont, Gordon's niece, newly returned from wartime service with the Wrens, lounged by the window, her auburn hair catching the weak sunlight. She alone seemed detached, her gaze fixed on the rolling hills beyond, though her fingers betrayed her tension, twisting a stray thread on her sleeve. "They say she was on stage when it happened," Beatrice whispered, her voice a mix of awe and venom. "An actress. Barely 2 years married, and now she's got it all." Jeremy's pacing halted. "It's not right," he said, his tone clipped. "Legal. Gordon was swayed, beguiled by that woman. He'd never have cut us out if not for her." Lynn turned, her voice cool but sharp. "Uncle Gordon was no fool, Jeremy. He knew what he was doing. Rosaline's young, yes, but she's his widow. The will stands." Frances snapped, her eyes flashing. "For how long?" "She's a nobody, Lynn. A chorus girl who caught Gordon's eye at some tawdry revue. And now we're 2 beg scraps from her table." The room fell silent, the weight of their dependency on Gordon's fortune laid bare. Outside, the village of Wormsley Vale went about its business, oblivious to the Claude's turmoil. The greengrocer swept his stoop, children played in the lane, and the church clock chimed noon, its notes swallowed by the wind. Some miles away, in the dining room of the Stag, Wormsley Vale's only, and Hercule Poirot sat with his friend, Superintendent Spence, over a lunch of overcooked mutton and watery potatoes. Poirot, fastidious as ever, adjusted his tie and dabbed his mustache with a napkin, his small, precise movements at odds with the inn's rustic chaos. Spence, a broad man with a weathered face, leaned forward, his voice low. "You hear about the Claude business, Poirot?" quite the stir. Gordon Claude, rich as Croesus, blown to bits in the Blitz, left everything to a young wifesome actress, barely out of her teens. Families up in arms. Poirot's green eyes gleamed with interest. Mon ami, the sudden death of a wealthy man is always suggestive. And this young widow, what do they say of her? Spence shrugged, spearing a potato. Rosaline, her name is pretty, they say, but nervy. Moved into a rented manor here in Wormsley Vale. Families calling her a gold digger. Naturally, they're all but accusing her of dancing on Gordon's grave. Poirot sipped his tea, his mind turning like a well-oiled machine. And the will, it is certain, no ambiguities. Signed and sealed, according to the village talk. Jeremy Clody's, the brother, a lawyer tried to contest it, but it's watertight. Still, there's bad blood, you can feel it. Poirot nodded, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. He had come to Wormsley Vale to escape London's clamour, but the scent of intrigue was irresistible. The Clodes, with their wounded pride and empty pockets, intrigued him. And this Rosaline, a widow draped in wealth and suspicion, what was her truth? He resolved to observe her, perhaps at the village fete tomorrow, where all of Wormsley Vale would gather. As he rose, adjusting his hat with a flourish, Poirot murmured, "The war, it changes many things, Superintendent, but greed remains. Eternal. We shall see what secrets this flood of misfortune has swept to the surface." Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of sirens, a reminder of the world's unrest. For Hercule Poirot, the unrest within the human heart was far more compelling. Chapter 2. The Widow's Shadow. The village of Wormsley Vale lay nestled in a fold of the English countryside. Its thatched cottages and winding lanes, a picture of pastoral calm, untouched by the war's clamour, save for the occasional drone of planes overhead. Yet beneath this tranquil surface, a current of unease stirred, as if the village itself sensed the discord that had settled in its midst with the arrival of Rosaline Claude. The young widow, now mistress of Gordon Claude's fortune, had taken residence at Furrow Bank, a rented manor on the village's edge, its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows standing in stark contrast to the modest homes of her late husband's kin. The Claudes, relegated to their diminished circumstances, watched her with a mixture of envy and suspicion, their whispers weaving a web of gossip that reached even the keen ears of Hercule Poirot. Poirot, having resolved to linger in Wormsley Vale after his conversation with Superintendent Spence, had secured a room at the Stag, its low ceilings and creaking floors a minor irritation to his fastidious nature. He sat now in the inn's parlour, a cup of tepid tea before him, his small, neat hands folded as he listened to the innkeeper, Mrs. Ledbetter, who bustled about with a tray of scones and a wealth of village lore. Her round face, flushed from the kitchen's heat, bore the eager expression of one who relished a tale. "She's a queer one, that Mrs. Claude," Mrs. Ledbetter said, setting down the tray with a clatter. "Keeps to herself, mostly, up at Furrowbank. They say she sees things, ghosts, maybe. Wouldn't surprise me, a house like that, all shadows and echoes." Poirot's green eyes flickered with interest. "Ghosts, you say? And what does Madame Claude see?" Mrs. Ledbetter leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "Mirrors, sir. She won't look in my girl, Sally, who does for her up at the manor, says she covers them with cloths. Says she sees Mr. Gordon's face staring back, like he's not gone at all." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching slightly. "And the family, the Claudes, they visit her." "Visit?" Mrs. Ledbetter snorted. "They'd sooner visit a viper's nest. They're all down at Wormsley Heath, crammed into that poky house of Mrs. Beatrice's, plotting and scheming. Not that I blame mind. Mr. Gordon was their lifeline, and now this slip of a girl's got it all." Poirot thanked her, his mind already turning over this new piece of the puzzle. A widow who feared mirrors, a family nursing their grievances. This was no mere aftermath of a bombing. There was a deeper current here, one that tugged at his little gray cells. He decided to attend the village fete, a modest affair to raise funds for the war effort, where Rosaline was expected to appear. It would be an opportunity to observe her, to gauge the truth behind her haunted demeanor. The fete was held on the village green, a patch of grass bordered by ancient oaks and dotted with stalls offering jam, knitted socks, and dubious homemade cordials. The air carried the scent of damp earth and baking, mingled with the laughter of children and the murmur of neighbors exchanging news. Poirot, dressed impeccably in a gray suit despite the autumn chill, moved through the crowd with the air of a man merely enjoying a country outing. His eyes, however, missed nothing. The furtive glances of the villagers, the stiff postures of the Claude family as they manned a cake stall, and the solitary figure of Rosaline Claude, standing apart near a display of watercolors. Rosaline was younger than Poirot had imagined, her slight frame swathed in a dark green coat that seemed too large for her. Her face, pale and heart-shaped, bore the delicate beauty of a porcelain doll, but her eyes were restless, darting as if expecting a blow. Her hands, clutching a small handbag, trembled slightly, and she flinched when a child's balloon popped nearby. Poirot approached, his manner courteous, introducing himself as a visitor interested in the village's charms. "Madame Claude, I am Hercule Poirot. I have heard much of Wormsley Vale's beauty, and now I see its most charming resident." Rosaline's smile was fleeting, her voice soft with an Irish lilt. "You're kind, sir, but I'm no charm. Just a stranger here, trying to find my way." Poirot noted the strain in her tone, the way her gaze avoided the mirror-like surface of a nearby silver tray. "It must be difficult," he said gently, "to lose so much and yet be so alone." Her eyes met his briefly, wide and startled, as if he had touched a hidden wound. I manage," she stammered, then excused herself, hurrying toward the manor's gates. Poirot watched her go, his mind cataloguing her fear, her isolation. She was no scheming adventuress, he thought, but a woman caught in a net she did not understand. His attention was drawn to Lynn Marchmont, who stood at the cake stall, her auburn hair bright against the drab brown of her coat. She was laughing with a villager, but her eyes followed Rosaline's retreat, a flicker of curiosity, or was it pity? Crossing her face, Poirot approached, offering a polite bow. "Mademoiselle Marchmont, I believe, Hercule Poirot, at your service. I have just met Madame Claude, most intriguing lady." Lynn's smile was wry, her voice carrying the clipped confidence of her naval service. "Intriguing's one word for her. Rosaline's got the whole village talking, though she hardly says a word herself. Aunt Beatrice says she's bewitched, but I think she's just scared." Scared? Poirot tilted his head, inviting more. Lynn hesitated, then lowered her voice. "She's not herself, Monsieur Poirot. I saw her yesterday, walking by the river, muttering about seeing Uncle Gordon in her room. She looked well, like she'd seen a ghost. And then there's that brother of hers, David Hunter. He's always hovering, like a guard dog. I don't trust him." Poirot's interest sharpened. "This Monsieur Hunter, he is protective, yes. Overly," Lynn said, her tone dry. "He's got a temper, too. Snapped at Jeremy yesterday when he tried to talk to Rosaline about the will. If you ask me, David's the one running the show." Before Poirot could probe further, a commotion erupted near the tea tent. A young man, lean and dark-haired with a restless energy, was arguing with Jeremy Claude. Poirot recognized the man's sharp features from Lynn's description. Hunter, his voice, though low, carried a dangerous edge. "You've no right to harass her." "Claude," David said, his fists clenched. "Rosaline's the widow, not your charity case. Keep your nose out of it." Jeremy, his face flushed, adjusted his glasses. "We're family," Hunter. We've a right to know what's going on. That will is none of your business, David cut in, his eyes blazing. He turned on his heel, striding toward Furrowbank. Where Rosaline had vanished, Poirot observed the exchange, noting the raw hostility between the men. Jeremy's wife, Frances, joined him, her expression one of cold disdain as she watched David go. The other clothes Beatrice, Lionel, and a cousin Rolly, a farmer with a weathered face huddled nearby, their whispers urgent. Poirot sensed a conspiracy, not yet formed but simmering, driven by the family's desperation to reclaim what they saw as theirs. That evening, as Poirot sipped a brandy in the Stag's parlor, a letter arrived at Furrowbank, its contents spreading through the village like wildfire by morning. It was anonymous, scrawled in a bold hand, and claimed that Gordon Claude had been seen alive in Cape Town during the war, long after the bombing. The news electrified the Claudes. Jeremy, clutching the letter at breakfast, declared it proof that Rosaline's inheritance was invalid. Beatrice, her eyes alight with hope, spoke of justice. Only Lynn, pouring tea with a steady hand, seemed skeptical. It's too convenient, she told Poirot, who had called at Wormsley Heath under the pretense of seeking local history. Uncle Gordon's dead eye saw the ruins myself. This letter smells of a trick, but who'd go to such lengths? Poirot, seated in the cramped parlor, his hat balanced on his knee, smiled faintly. Mademoiselle, when a fortune is at stake, many will go to great lengths. Tell me, this letter, has anyone seen it? Jeremy's got it locked in his desk, Lynn said. He's planning to hire a private inquiry agent to track down this supposed sighting. But Rosaline, she's terrified. David says she won't sleep, keeps talking about Gordon coming back to haunt her. Poirot's fingers tapped a rhythm on his cane. And you, Mademoiselle Lynn, what do you believe? She met his gaze, her gray eyes steady. I believe someone's playing a cruel game. Rosaline's not strong, she's been through too much. And David, he's hiding something. I don't know what, but I feel it. Poirot rose, his mind alight with possibilities. The letter, the widow's fear, the family's greed, these were threads in a tapestry he had yet to unravel. He decided to visit Furrowbank, to see Rosaline in her own domain, where the mirrors were covered and the shadows held their secrets. Furrowbank was a house of contrasts. Its elegant facade belied the chill within, as if the warmth had fled with Gordon's death. Rosaline received Poirot in a drawing-room cluttered with heavy furniture, the curtains half drawn against the afternoon light. A mirror above the mantel was draped with a black cloth, its edges frayed. Rosaline sat on a velvet sofa, her hands twisting a handkerchief, her brother David standing behind her like a sentinel. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I don't know why you're here, but I've nothing to hide. Gordon's gone, and I'm doing my best. Poirot bowed, his tone soothing. Madame, I am a man who seeks only the truth. This letter, it has caused you distress. Her eyes widened, and she glanced at David, who stepped forward, his jaw tight. That letter's nonsense, he said. Some vulture trying to scare Rosaline. She's had enough without the Claude stirring trouble. Poirot studied David, noting the defensive tilt of his shoulders, the way his hand rested near his pocket, as if guarding something or ready to strike. And yet, Poirot said, Madame Claude seems most affected. Perhaps, Madame, you could tell me of your life with Monsieur Gordon. It might clarify matters. Rosaline's lips trembled, and she shook her head. It was happy, short, but happy. He was kind, and I loved him. But now, I see him everywhere. In the house, in my dreams. It's like he's not gone. David's hand touched her shoulder, a gesture both comforting and controlling. That's enough, Rosaline, you're tired. Monsieur Poirot, we've nothing more to say. Poirot inclined his head, sensing the interview was at an end. As he left Furrowbank, The wind carried the scent of rain, and he felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the manor's windows. The letter, he thought, was no idle prank. It was a gambit, designed to unsettle, perhaps to destroy. But who held the pen, and who stood to gain? The Clodes, with their hungry eyes, David Hunter, with his fierce protectiveness, or Rosaline herself, whose fear seemed to mask a deeper truth. Back at the Stag, Poirot sat by the fire, his notebook open, his pencil sketching a web of names and motives. Rosaline's terror, Lynn's suspicions, the family's resentment, these were not random waves, but currents in a flood, sweeping toward a hidden truth. He closed his eyes, his little gray cells humming, and murmured, "The widow casts a shadow. But it is not her own. Nan, there is another hand at work, and Hercule Poirot will find it." The village clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the quiet. Outside, the first drops of rain fell, heralding a storm that would wash away more than the dust of Wormsley Vale. Chapter 3. The man from nowhere. The rain that had threatened Wormsley Vale arrived with a vengeance, turning the lanes to mud and cloaking the village in a grey mist. Furrowbank, Rosaline Clode's rented manor, stood isolated on its hill, its windows glowing faintly against the storm's gloom. The village, however, buzzed with a new energy, sparked by the arrival of a stranger who called himself Enoch Arden. He had taken a room at the Stag, where Hercule Poirot, ever observant, noted his presence over breakfast. The man was lean, with a weathered face and a scar that jagged across his left cheek like a lightning bolt. His speech was rough, tinged with a colonial accent, and his eyes held the wary glint of one accustomed to trouble. Poirot, seated at a corner table with a cup of barely tolerable coffee, watched as Arden exchanged words with Mrs. Ledbetar, the innkeeper. The man's manner was brusque, his questions sharp. Had Rosaline Clode been seen in the village? Did she entertain visitors? Mrs. Leadbetter, eager to gossip, obliged with tales of Rosaline's reclusiveness and the family's resentment. Arden listened, his fingers drumming on the table, then left abruptly, his coat collar turned up against the rain. The stranger's arrival had not gone unnoticed by the Clodes. At Wormsley Heath, the family's cramped retreat, Jeremy Clode pored over the anonymous letter claiming Gordon's survival, his spectacles glinting in the lamplight. Beatrice, his sister, hovered nearby, her voice shrill with excitement. "This Arden fellow, he must know something," she insisted, twisting her handkerchief. "If Gordon was alive in Cape Town, Rosaline's claim is worthless. We could have it all back." Jeremy's thin lips curled. "We must tread carefully, Beatrice. This man could be a fraud, or worse, a blackmailer. But if he speaks truth," he trailed off, his mind already calculating legal maneuvers. Lynn Marchmont, leaning against the doorframe, rolled her eyes. "You're all grasping at straws. Gordon's dead. I saw the rubble in Chelsea myself. This Arden's probably a chancer, sniffing for a payout." Her cousin Rowley, the farmer, grunted from his chair by the fire. "Maybe so, Lynn, but he's stirred things up. Rosaline's rattled David Hunter was in a state when he heard about him." Poirot, invited to Wormsley Heath for tea, under the guise of discussing village history, arrived as the family's debate reached a fever pitch. The parlor, cluttered with faded photographs and mismatched china, felt stifling, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Lynn greeted him with a wry smile, her naval discipline evident in her straight posture, while Jeremy offered a stiff handshake, his eyes assessing Poirot as one might a rival counsel. "Monsieur Poirot," Jeremy began, adjusting his glasses, "you've heard of this Enoch Arden? A most curious development. He claims to have known Gordon in Africa, after the bombing. It raises possibilities." Poirot inclined his head, his expression bland, but his mind alert. "Possibilities, oui, but also questions. This Monsieur Arden, what does he seek? Truth or profit?" Beatrice interjected, her voice trembling with hope. He says he has proof letters perhaps, or witnesses. He's been to Furrowbank, you know, demanding to see Rosalind. David Hunter sent him packing, but not before Arden hinted at secrets. Poirot's mustache twitched. Secrets are like coins, madame, they have value only when spent. What does this Arden ask of Madame Claude? Frances, Jeremy's wife, spoke for the first time, her tone icy. Money, of course. He's a vulture, circling a wounded creature. Rosaline's week she pay to keep him quiet. Lynn frowned, her fingers tightening on her teacup. Or David will handle it his way. He's not one for diplomacy. Poirot sipped his tea, grimacing at its bitterness, and filed away their words. The Claudes were a chorus of discontent, each voice tuned to their own desires. Jeremy's legal ambition, Beatrice's wounded pride, Frances's cold pragmatism, and Lynn's sharp skepticism. But it was Rowley's silence that intrigued him. Most the farmer's weathered hands and steady gaze suggested a man who saw more than he said. That evening, the village was shaken by a grim discovery. Enoch Arden was found dead in his room at the Stag, his body slumped over a rickety table, his skull crushed by a single blow. The rain had kept the village quiet, and no one had seen a visitor to his room. Superintendent Spence, summoned from the county station, surveyed the scene with a dear expression, while Poirot, granted permission to observe as a courtesy, examined the room with meticulous care. The chamber was sparse, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair. Arden's few belongings, a battered suitcase, a few crumpled shirts offered little insight. But Poirot's attention was drawn to a half-finished canvas propped against the wall, depicting a turbulent sea under a stormy sky. The paint was fresh, the brushstrokes bold, yet the work was unsigned. A scrap of paper, tucked beneath the canvas, bore a single word: flood. Poirot pocketed it discreetly, his mind racing. Spence, rubbing his jaw, turned to Poirot. Looks like a robbery gone wrong, but there's nothing missing. No wallet, no papers, just that painting. Odd thing for a drifter to carry. Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. Odd indeed, mon ami. A man like Arden does not paint for pleasure. This canvas it is a clue, perhaps a message. We must learn who he was, and who wished him silent. The village, already alight with gossip, now hummed with fear. At Furrowbank, Rosaline refused to leave her room, her brother David barring the door to all but the doctor. The Claudes gathered at Wormsley Heath, speculated wildly. Had Rosaline killed Arden to protect her secret? Had David acted on her behalf? Or was this the work of an outsider, exploiting the family's turmoil? Poirot, returning to the Stag, sat by the fire, his notebook open. He sketched a timeline: Gordon's death in 1944, Rosalind's inheritance, the anonymous letter, Arden's arrival, and now his murder. The canvas, with its stormy sea, gnawed at him. Was it a metaphor, a warning, or something more tangible? And the word flood, was it a reference to the letter's cryptic phrase, or a deeper symbol of the chaos engulfing Wormsley Vale? He resolved to speak with Rosaline again, to probe the fear that clung to her like a shadow. But first, he would visit the local artist, David Hunter's acquaintance, who might shed light on the canvas. As the rain drummed on the inn's roof, Poirot murmured, "The man from nowhere has left us a riddle, and Hercule Poirot does not rest until the riddle is solved." The storm raged on, but in Poirot's mind, the first threads of truth were beginning to surface, like debris carried by a relentless flood. Chapter 4. The weight of a will. The rain had relented by morning, leaving Wormsley Vale, sodden but serene, its lanes glistening under a pale sun. The murder of Enoch Arden hung over the village like a fog, thickening the air with suspicion. At the Stag, Hercule Poirot sat in the parlor, his breakfast untouched, save for a single slice of toast, his attention fixed on the scrap of paper bearing the word flood. The canvas found in Arden's room had been removed by Superintendent Spence for examination, but Poirot's memory of its stormy sea lingered, a visual echo of the turmoil in the Claude family. He sensed the threads of the mystery tightening Arden's death. The anonymous letter, Rosaline's Ferrand, resolved to unravel them with his customary precision. Furrowbank, Rosaline Claude's manor, was his first destination. The house loomed against the damp hills, its stone facade imposing yet forlorn, as if it mourned its former master. Poirot, admitted by a nervous maid, found Rosaline in a high-ceilinged study, its walls lined with books Gordon Claude had never read. She sat at a mahogany desk, her pale hands clutching a document, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. David Hunter stood by the window, his lean frame tense, his gaze flicking between Poirot and the garden beyond. "Monsieur Poirot," Rosaline said, her Irish lilt strained, "I don't know what you want, but I've nothing to hide. This business with Arden, it's awful, but I didn't know him." Poirot bowed, his manner impeccable. "Madame, I seek only clarity. The death of this man, it raises questions. And this letter, claiming Monsieur Gordon lives it, troubles you deeply." Rosaline's fingers tightened on the document, which Poirot recognized as a will. "It's nonsense," she said, her voice quivering. "Gordon's gone. I saw the ruins in London. But that letter, it's like he's watching me, judging me." David stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Enough, Rosaline. You don't owe this man explanations. He's poking about where he's not wanted." Poirot's green eyes met David's, unperturbed. "Monsieur Hunter, when murder occurs, all questions are wanted. Madame, may I see this will?" Rosaline hesitated, then slid the document across the desk. It was Gordon Claude's last testament, dated 6 months before the bombing, its language stark. All assets to Rosaline, with no mention of the family. The ink was crisp, the signature bold, yet Poirot noted a faint tremor in the pen strokes, as if Gordon had written under duress. He returned the will, his mind cataloguing its details. "Madame, your life before Monsieur Gordon perhaps you could share. It may illuminate these shadows." Rosaline's gaze dropped, her hands twisting her handkerchief. "I was an actress, nothing grand. Toured with a company in the province's small roles, mostly. Gordon saw me in a play in Brighton. He was kind, generous. We married quickly. That's all." David's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot noted the brevity of her tale, the gaps she left unfilled. "And this letter, Madame, it arrived when—" "3 days ago," she whispered. "It came to Furrowbank, no postmark. David burned it, but I can't forget it. It said Gordon was seen in Cape Town, alive, last year." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Curious, Nan. A letter without origin. A man without a past. And now, a death. I thank you, Madame, for your candor." As he left Furrowbank, Poirot's thoughts turned to the Claudes. Their resentment was a palpable force, and Jeremy the solicitor seemed the linchpin. Poirot made his way to Wormsley Heath, where the family's modest house stood in contrast to Furrowbank's grandeur. Jeremy received him in a cluttered study, papers strewn across a desk, his spectacles glinting with calculation. "Monsieur Poirot," Jeremy said, his tone measured, "this Arden business is a tragedy, but it proves something's amiss. That letter about Gordon, it could change everything." Poirot tilted his head. "You believe Monsieur Gordon lives, Monsieur Claude?" Jeremy's lips thinned. "I believe someone knows more than they're saying. Arden claimed to have evidence, perhaps, or a witness. If Gordon was alive after the bombing, Rosaline's inheritance is void. I have an earlier will, you see, from before he met her. It favored us as family. He produced a document, its pages yellowed, its terms clear. Gordon's estate divided among his siblings and their heirs." Poirot studied it, noting the date 2 years prior to the current will. "And this will, It was superseded legally. Jeremy nodded, his fingers drumming. Yes, but if Gordon lived, the new will could be contested, Arden's death suggests. Someone wanted his silence. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you, monsieur, what did you make of Arden? A rough sort, Jeremy said. I met him briefly at the Stag. He was cagey, demanded money to share what he knew. I refused, of course. Then he was killed. Poirot filed away Jeremy's words, sensing half-truths. He left Wormsley Heath, his cane tapping the muddy path, and turned his attention to a new clue, the painting in Arden's room. Its stormy sea and the word flood suggested a connection to the letter, perhaps a code. He sought out David Hunter, who was known to dabble in art, at a small studio in the village. A converted barn where canvases leaned against rough walls. David was there, cleaning brushes, his movements sharp with suppressed anger. A portrait of Gordon Claude hung on the wall, its eyes vivid, almost alive. Poirot studied it, noting the frame's ornate carving, its patina suggesting age. Monsieur Hunter, Poirot began, this portrait is your work, oui? David nodded curtly. Rosaline asked me to paint it, after Gordon died. A keepsake, she said. Poirot's fingers traced the frame. The eyes, they follow one Nan. A clever effect. When did you complete it? Last month, David said, his tone guarded. Why does it matter? Poirot smiled faintly. Everything matters, monsieur. This painting, it is recent, yet the frame is old. A curious choice. David's eyes flickered, but he said nothing. Poirot left the studio, his mind turning over. The portrait's significance. The eyes, so lifelike, seemed to watch him still, as if Gordon himself lingered in the brushstrokes. Was the painting a tribute, or something more sinister prop in a scheme to unsettle Rosaline? Back at the Stag, Poirot learned of a new development. The maid at Furrowbank, Sally, overheard Rosaline and David arguing the night before Arden's death. Sally, wide-eyed and eager, confided to Mrs. Ledbetter that David had mentioned keeping her in line and no more mistakes. Poirot, sipping a brandy by the fire, added this to his mental tapestry. David's protectiveness was a shield, but for whom? Rosaline, or himself? The village clock chimed 9, its notes swallowed by the evening mist. Poirot opened his notebook, sketching connections. The will, the letter, the painting, Arden's death. Each was a piece of a puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. Rosaline's fear, David's volatility, the Claude's greed all swirled in a current of deceit. And at its heart, the word flood, a warning or a promise, tied to a canvas that held secrets yet to be revealed. Monsieur Poirot does not falter, he murmured, closing his notebook. The weight of this will presses heavily, but it is the truth that will rise to the surface. Outside, the wind stirred, carrying the scent of rain once more, as if the flood itself waited to break. Chapter 5. The Tide of Suspicion. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Wormsley Vale, casting a feeble light on the village's sodden lanes, but it did little to dispel the shadow cast by Enoch Arden's murder. The news had spread like wildfire, fanned by whispers at the greengrocer's and the post office, where villagers speculated over Rosaline Claude's role in the tragedy. At the Stag, Hercule Poirot sat in the parlor, his small, neat hands folded over his cane, his mind sifting through the clues that piled like driftwood. The anonymous letter, the stormy canvas, the word flood, and now the maid's tale of David Hunter's cryptic words. The tide of suspicion was rising, and Poirot sensed it would soon engulf someone, perhaps the wrong someone, unless he intervened. Rosaline Claude, ensconced at Furrowbank, had become a ghost in her own home. The maid, Sally, confided to Poirot over a cup of tea in the inn's kitchen that her mistress avoided the drawing-room, where Gordon's portrait hung, and refused to pass the hall mirror, even with its cloth cover. She's proper shook, sir, Sally said, her eyes wide. Says she hears him at night, pacing the corridors. Mr. David, he tells her it's nonsense. But she's not sleeping, not eating much neither. Poirot's green eyes gleamed. And Monsieur Hunter, he is always with her. We, like a hawk, sir, Sally replied. Won't let anyone near her, not even the doctor, unless he's there. Last night, I heard M arguing against something about no more risks. Mr. David sounded fierce. Poirot thanked her, his mind turning to Rosalind's fragility. Was it genuine fear, or a performance honed by her theatrical past? He resolved to observe her again, but first, he sought Lynn Marchmont, whose sharp instincts had already proven valuable. He found her at the village post office, mailing a letter, her auburn hair tucked under a scarf, her face thoughtful. Mademoiselle Lynn, Poirot greeted, tipping his hat. A moment, if you please. This tragedy with Monsieur Ardinet has stirred the village, Nan. Lynn's grey eyes met his, her expression wary but open. It stirred more than that, Monsieur Poirot. The Claudes are practically dancing on his grave, thinking it proves their case against Rosaline. Aunt Beatrice swears she's behind it, and Jeremy's talking about hiring a detective to dig into her past. Poirot's mustache twitched. And you, what do you think? Lynn hesitated, glancing around the empty post office. I saw Rosaline near the stag the evening Arden died. She was hurrying, looked frightened. I don't think she killed him. She hasn't the nerve, but someone did, and David's acting like a man with something to hide. Poirot nodded, filing away her observation. You are observant, mademoiselle. Tell me, this Monsieur David, he is devoted to his sister. We. Too devoted, Lynn said, her voice dry. He watches her like she's a child, or a prisoner. I don't trust him, not after what Sally heard. And there's something else. He was in a foul mood yesterday, snapping at Rowley when he asked about Rosaline's health. It's not like David to lose his cool so publicly. Poirot thanked her and made his way to the village doctor's surgery. A small brick building smelling of antiseptic and damp wool. Dr. Lionel Claude Gordon's nephew was a thin man with nervous hands and a distracted air, his desk cluttered with medical journals. Poirot, posing as a concerned visitor, inquired about Rosaline's health. She's not well, Lionel admitted, rubbing his eyes. Nervous exhaustion, I'd say. I've prescribed sedatives, mild ones, mind you, but she's dependent on them. David insists on managing her doses, which I don't like, but he's her brother. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And these sedatives, they are safe. We, of course, Lionel said, bristling. I'm a doctor, Monsieur Poirot. I know my trade. But Rosalind, she's under strain. That letter about Gordon, then Arden's murder, it's too much for her. Poirot left the surgery, his mind buzzing. David's control over Rosalind's medication was a new thread, one that tugged at his suspicions. He decided to visit the police station, where Superintendent Spence was sifting through reports on Arden's death. The station, a squat building beside the church, was quiet, its walls lined with faded posters urging wartime thrift. Poirot, Spence greeted, waving him to a chair. You're sticking your nose in, eh? Well, we've got nothing solid on Arden's killer. No fingerprints. No witnesses. The blow was clean, one strike. Likely a blunt object. Could be anyone. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft. And Madame Claude, she is a suspect. Spence shrugged. She's got motive, if Arden was squeezing her for money. But she's frail, and David swears she was at Furrowbank all evening. Problem is, no one else confirms it. The maid was off, and the other servants didn't see her after supper. Poirot's fingers tapped his cane. And the canvas, the painting in Arden's room, in any progress? Nothing yet, Spence said. We're checking if it's his work, but it's odd. Why paint a storm at sea? Doesn't fit a drifter's profile. Poirot rose, his mind alight with possibilities. The painting, the sedatives, Rosalind's fear, David's temper, these were not isolated incidents but waves in a larger current. He returned to the Stag, where Mrs. Leadbitter, ever eager, shared a fresh tidbit. Sally had overheard David and Rosaline arguing about the plan to nights before Arden's death. In the Manor's library, she said Mr. David was angry. Sir, Mrs. Leadbitter whispered, polishing a glass. Told Rosaline to stick to it, or else. Sounds like they're up to something, don't it? Poirot thanked her, his thoughts racing. The plan was, it a scheme to secure the inheritance, or something darker. He recalled Lynn's observation of Rosaline near the Stag, and a new hypothesis formed. What if Rosaline had gone to confront Arden, only to find him door to witness his murder? David's protectiveness might be a shield, not for her innocence, but for her involvement. That afternoon, Poirot attended a village meeting at the church hall, where the Claudes were present, their faces a study in strained civility. Jeremy spoke of community spirit, but his eyes darted to Rosaline, who sat at the back, pale and silent, David at her side. Beatrice whispered to Francis, her gestures animated, while Rowley stood apart, his farmer's hands clasped, his gaze unreadable. Lynn caught Poirot's eye, her expression a mix of curiosity and unease. As the meeting ended, Poirot approached Rosaline, who flinched at his approach. Madame, a word. This strain, you suffer it, is more than grief. Noun. Rosaline's eyes filled with tears. I can't explain it, monsieur. It's like I'm drowning. Gordon's gone, but I feel him everywhere. And now that man, Arden, dead. I didn't do it, I swear. David's hand gripped her arm. That's enough, Rosaline. Monsieur Poirot, you're upsetting her. Leave it to the police. Poirot bowed, his smile polite but his eyes sharp. The police, they seek facts. Monsieur, I seek the truth. And the truth, it is like the tide, it cannot be held back. As he left the hall, Poirot's mind churned. Rosaline's fear was real, but was it of ghosts, or of her brother? David's control, the sedatives, the argument about the plan. These pointed to a hidden agenda. And the Claudes, with their eager whispers, were not innocent bystanders. Jeremy's talk of an earlier will, Beatrice's zeal, Francis' cold calculation all suggested a family poised to exploit Rosaline's vulnerability. Back at the Stag, Poirot sat by the fire, his notebook open. He drew a diagram, Rosaline at the center, David a dark orbit around her, the Claudes circling like sharks. The painting, with its stormy sea, loomed in his thoughts, its word flood a cipher he had yet to crack. Was it a warning, a signature, or a taunt? And Arden, had he been a pawn, or a player in this deadly game? The village clock struck 10, its chimes, a solemn reminder of time's passage. Poirot closed his notebook, his voice a murmur. The tide rises, and with it, the truth. Hercule Poirot will not be swept away. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet earth, and in the distance, Furrowbank's lights flickered, a beacon in the gathering dark. Chapter 6. A ghost in the framed air in Wormsley Vale carried a chill that went beyond the autumn damp, as if the village itself shivered under the weight of Enoch Arden's unsolved murder. The whispers of Rosaline Claude's involvement had grown into a chorus, with the villagers casting sidelong glances at Furrowbank's gates, where the young widow remained cloistered. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the gloom, sat in his room at the Stag, his notebook a map of connections, the anonymous letter, the stormy canvas, David Hunter's cryptic plan, and Rosaline's haunting fear of her late husband's presence. Each clue was a ripple in a larger current, and Poirot sensed the tide was turning toward a revelation. The morning brought a new development, one that set the Claudes alight with renewed vigor. Jeremy Claude, ever the solicitor, had secured a witness, say, former soldier, named Thomas Gale, who claimed to have seen Gordon Claude in Cape Town in early 1945. months after the bombing that supposedly claimed his life. The family gathered at Wormsley Heath, their cramped parlor a stage for their latest performance of hope and ambition. Poirot, invited under the pretense of discussing village lore, observed their fervor with a keen eye. Jeremy stood by the mantel, his voice crisp with authority. "This Gale fellow is credible, Monsieur Poirot. He served in North Africa, knew Gordon from business dealings before the war. He swears he saw him at a hotel in Cape Town, alive and well." Beatrice, her eyes gleaming, clasped her hands. "It's proof, isn't it? If Gordon was alive, Rosaline's will is invalid. The estate belongs to us." Lynn Marchmont, perched on the arm of a worn sofa, frowned. "It's too neat, Jeremy. A soldier popping up now, after all this time. And Arden's murder, it's all connected, but not the way you want it to be." Frances, Jeremy's wife, shot Lynn a sharp look. "You're too skeptical, Lynn. This could be our chance to right a wrong." Rosaline's had her day. Poirot, sipping tea that tasted of dishwater, tilted his head. "This Monsieur Gale, he is available to speak. His testimony, it is most convenient." Jeremy nodded, adjusting his spectacles. "He's staying at the Red Lion in the next village. I've arranged to meet him tomorrow. You're welcome to join us, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot inclined his head, his mind already dissecting Gale's sudden appearance. "A witness from nowhere, like Arden," suggested. Orchestration. Was this a genuine lead, or a ploy to destabilize Rosaline further? He decided to revisit Furrowbank, to gauge the widow's reaction to this new claim. But first, he returned to the portrait of Gordon Claude, painted by David Hunter, which had lingered in his thoughts since his visit to the studio. The portrait hung in Furrowbank's drawing room, its piercing eyes seeming to follow Poirot as he entered. Rosaline was absent, but David was there, polishing a silver candlestick with unnecessary vigor. The room was dim, the covered mirror casting a shadow that seemed to deepen the portrait's gaze. Poirot studied the painting, noting again the aged frame, its intricate carvings worn but intact, and the fresh brushstrokes of the canvas itself. "Monsieur Hunter," Poirot began, his voice soft, "this portrait, it is a remarkable likeness. You painted it recently, you said, yet the frame it is old, non." David's hands paused, his eyes narrowing. "What of it?" "I used an old frame from the attic. Rosaline wanted it to feel authentic." Poirot's fingers traced the frame's edge, where a faint inscription caught his eye. "G.C., 1942. He smiled faintly. "Authentic, oui. But curious that you should choose a frame dated before Monsieur Gordon's death, for a painting done after. It suggests intention." David's jaw tightened, but he shrugged. "I'm an artist, not a historian. I picked what looked right." Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on the portrait's eyes, so vivid they seemed to pulse with life. "These eyes, they watch, monsieur. They see much, perhaps more than you intended." David set the candlestick down with a clink. "You're fishing, Poirot. If you've got questions, ask them plain." Poirot's smile was serene. "I ask only for the truth, monsieur. And the truth, it has a way of revealing itself." Leaving Furrowbank, Poirot's thoughts churned. The portrait was no mere keepsake. Its timing and craftsmanship suggested a purpose, perhaps to reinforce the illusion of Gordon's survival. David's defensiveness only deepened his suspicion. Was the painting part of the plan Sally had overheard? And if so, who was its architect, David, Rosaline, or another? That evening, tragedy struck again. Rosaline Claude was found dead in her bedroom at Furrowbank, her body curled on the floor beside an empty vial of sedatives. The village doctor, Lionel Claude, was summoned, his face pale as he confirmed an overdose. Superintendent Spence, arriving with his usual door efficiency, declared it a probable suicide, noting Rosaline's fragile state and the pressure of Arden's murder. The Clodes, gathered at Wormsley Heath, received the news with a mix of shock and grim satisfaction, their whispers of justice barely veiled. Poirot, however, was not convinced. He joined Spence at Furrowbank, where the bedroom was a scene of quiet devastation, the bed unmade, a glass of water spilled, the covered mirror reflecting nothing but sorrow. Poirot examined the vial, its label smudged, but legible, prescribed by Lionel, dispensed by David. He noted a faint residue in the glass, a bitter scent that lingered. "Suicide, you think, mon ami?" Poirot asked Spence, his voice low. Spence rubbed his jaw. "Looks like it. She was unraveling Arden's death. That letter, the family hounding her. But I'll have the vial tested, just in case." Poirot's eyes scanned the room, landing on a small writing desk. A drawer, slightly ajar, revealed a crumpled envelope, its contents missing. He pocketed it discreetly, suspecting it was linked to the anonymous letter. "Madame Claude, she was afraid, oui. But of what? Not only ghosts, I think. At the Stag." Poirot learned from Sally that Rosaline had been alone most of the evening, David having left for a walk after supper. The maid's eyes were red, her voice trembling. "She was so quiet, sir, like she knew something was coming. Mr. David. He was upset when he came back, found her like that, and shouted for me." Poirot's mind raced. Rosaline's death, so soon after Arden's, was no coincidence. The sedatives, David's absence, the missing letter, all pointed to a calculated act. He recalled Lynn's suspicion of David's temper and the maid's tale of the plan. Was Rosaline a victim of her brother's ambition, or had the Clodes, desperate to reclaim their inheritance, taken a darker path? He sat by the fire, his notebook open, sketching a new web, Rosaline at its center, her death a pivot point, David's control, the portrait's eerie presence, Gale's convenient testimony. These were not random waves, but a orchestrated flood. The frame's inscription, G.C. 1942, gnawed at him. It was a detail too precise, too deliberate, as if meant to be noticed. "The ghost in the frame," Poirot murmured, his eyes on the flickering flames. "It is not Gordon Claude who haunts this house, but the truth, waiting to be seen." The village clock struck midnight, its chimes a solemn counterpoint to the storm brewing in Poirot's mind. Tomorrow he would meet Thomas Gale, test the soldier's tale, and confront the portrait's secrets. For now, he closed his notebook, resolved that the tide of suspicion would not sweep him away. Chapter 7. The currents of deceit. The dawn broke over Wormsley Vale with a deceptive calm. The village's quiet lanes, masking the turmoil that had claimed to live in as many weeks. Rosaline Claude's death, ruled an accidental overdose by Superintendent Spence, hung like a pall over Furrowbank, where the covered mirrors and silent corridors seemed to mourn her passing. Hercule Poirot, however, saw no accident in the widow's demise. The crumpled envelope in her room, the bitter residue in her glass, and David Hunter's convenient absence pointed to a darker truth. At the Stag, Poirot sat in the parlor, his breakfast untouched, his notebook a labyrinth of names and motives. Rosaline, Arden, David, the Clodes, and the elusive Thomas Gale, whose tale of Gordon's survival had reignited the family's hopes. First task was to meet Gale, the former soldier, at the Red Lion in the neighboring village of Stenford. The inn was a cheerless place, its low beams and smoky air a stark contrast to Wormsley Vale's rustic charm. Gale, a wiry man with a sunburned face and restless hands, sat in a corner, nursing a pint. Jeremy Claude, who had arranged the meeting, introduced Poirot with a lawyer's practiced courtesy, his spectacles glinting with anticipation. "Monsieur Gale," Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished stone, "you claim to have seen Monsieur Gordon Claude in Cape Town." "Oui." "A remarkable tale, given his death in the Blitz." Gale's eyes darted to Jeremy, then back to Poirot. I knew Gordon from 41, when he was financing a shipping deal in Durban. Saw him clear as day in January 45, at the Mount Nelson Hotel. He was thinner, bearded, but it was him. We spoke about the war, old times. He said he was lying low. Poirot's mustache twitched. Lying low, a curious phrase for a man presumed dead. Did he mention his wife, Madame Rosaline? Gale shook his head. Not a word seemed secretive. I didn't press him. Jeremy leaned forward, his voice eager. This changes everything, Monsieur Poirot. If Gordon was alive, will is null. Gale's testimony could restore our inheritance. Poirot's green eyes studied Gale, noting the man's unease, the way his fingers toyed with his glass. And you, Monsieur Gale, you came forward only now. Why the delay? Gale shrugged, his smile thin. Wars kept me moving. Only heard about Gordon's estate recently. Thought it my duty to speak up. Poirot thanked him, his mind alert to the cracks in Gale's story. The soldier's precision, his readiness with details, felt rehearsed, as if coached. Jeremy's eagerness only deepened Poirot's suspicion Gale was a pawn, perhaps, in a game orchestrated by the Claudes. But to what end? To discredit Rosaline's claim, or to mask a greater crime? Returning to Wormsley Vale, Poirot sought out Lynn Marchmont, whose clear-eyed skepticism had become a beacon in the fog of deceit. He found her by the river, tossing pebbles into the current, her auburn hair catching the weak sunlight. She greeted him with a wry smile, her naval discipline evident in her steady gaze. Monsieur Poirot, you're still here, stirring the pot. What's this about a soldier claiming Uncle Gordon's alive? Poirot recounted Gale's story, watching her reaction. Lynn's frown deepened, her hand pausing mid-throw. It's nonsense, she said. I was in London when the bomb hit. There was nothing left of Uncle Gordon's house. Nothing. This Gale's either lying or mistaken, and I'd bet on lying. Poirot nodded, his cane tapping the ground. And Monsieur David Hunter, what of him? You mentioned his temper, his protectiveness. Lynn's eyes darkened. He's trouble, Monsieur Poirot. I saw him in London the night Arden was killed. He told Rosaline he was at Furrowbank, but I saw him near King's Cross, looking furtive. And now Rosaline's dead. She trailed off, her voice thick with unease. Poirot's mind seized on this. David's alibi, already shaky, was now shattered. Had he lied to protect himself, or Rosaline? And if Rosaline's death was no accident, was David the hand behind the fatal dose? Poirot thanked Lynn, his thoughts turning to the sedatives. Prescribed by Lionel but managed by David, he decided to revisit Furrowbank, to search Rosaline's room for further clues. The manor was silent, its staff subdued, David absent reportedly, handling funeral arrangements. Poirot, granted access by a reluctant Sally, examined Rosaline's bedroom with meticulous care. The spilled glass and empty vial were gone, taken by Spence, but the writing desk drew his attention. The crumpled envelope he had pocketed lay in his notebook, its interior revealing a faint trace of ink. Using a pencil, Poirot rubbed gently, uncovering a fragment of text. Must be done before. The rest was illegible, but the handwriting matched the anonymous letter about Gordon's survival. His search yielded another find, a hidden compartment in the desk, containing a letter in Gordon's hand, dated March 1945 after his supposed death. It was brief, addressed to Rosaline. My dearest, I am safe but cannot return yet. Trust no one. The signature was Gordon's, but Poirot's keen eye noted similarities to Jeremy's precise script, seen in his legal documents at Wormsley Heath. A forgery, perhaps, designed to terrify Rosaline into submission or worse. Poirot confronted Jeremy that afternoon at Wormsley Heath, where the family was gathered, their faces a mix of grief and calculation. Beatrice dabbed her eyes, Frances sat rigid, and Rowley's silence was as heavy as ever. Jeremy, caught off guard, adjusted his spectacles as Poirot produced the letter. Monsieur Claude Poirot said, his voice soft but unyielding. This letter, it is most curious. It claims Monsieur Gordon lived, yet its hand resembles your own. A coincidence, Nan. Jeremy's face flushed, but he recovered quickly. I drafted letters for Gordon. Often he trusted my pen. If this is a forgery, it's not mine. Perhaps Rosaline herself. Rosaline is dead. Poirot cut in, his eyes piercing. And this letter, it was meant to frighten her, to drive her to despair. You admit to writing such letters? Jeremy hesitated, then nodded. I wrote one, yes, to shake her. She was an interloper, Monsieur Poirot, but murder, never. Poirot left unconvinced. Jeremy's admission was a half-truth, a lawyer's dodge. The letter, the painting, David's lies all were currents in a deeper stream of deceit. He returned to the Stag, where Sally, trembling, shared a new detail. David had been seen handling Rosaline's sedative vial the morning of her death. Filling it from a bottle in his room, Poirot's notebook grew crowded, his diagram now a tangle of lines. Jeremy's forgery, David's deception, Gail's testimony, the portrait's eerie eyes. The word flood loomed largest, a symbol of chaos or a key to the truth. Was it a warning of Rosaline's fate, or a taunt from her killer? And the Claudes, were they conspirators, or merely opportunists riding the tide? As night fell, Poirot sat by the fire, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The currents of deceit run deep, he murmured, but Hercule Poirot will navigate them. The truth, it is like a beacon, it shines, even in the darkest flood. The village clock told 11, its chimes a solemn reminder of the lives lost and the secrets yet to surface. Tomorrow, Poirot would test Gail's story further and confront David, whose lies were unraveling like a poorly knotted rope. Chapter 8. The flood breaks the sky over Wormsley Vale, hung heavy with clouds, as if the village itself braced for a deluge to match the turmoil within its bounds. The deaths of Enoch Arden and Rosaline Claude had stirred the village into a frenzy of speculation, with fingers pointing at David Hunter, the Claudes, and even the spectre of Gordon Claude himself. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the rising tide of rumor, sat in his room at the Stag, his notebook a tapestry of clues, the forged letter in Gordon's hand, the stormy canvas with its cryptic flood, David's false alibi, and the portrait's watchful eyes. The pieces were aligning, and Poirot sensed the moment had come to draw the net tight. He had arranged a gathering at Furrowbank, inviting the Claudes, Superintendent Spence, and David Hunter, under the pretext of discussing Rosalie's estate. The Manor's drawing room, with its heavy drapes and covered mirror, felt like a stage set for a reckoning. The portrait of Gordon Claude dominated the space, its eyes seeming to pierce the gathered company. Jeremy Claude stood by the fireplace, his spectacles glinting with nervous anticipation. Beatrice, her handkerchief crumpled, sat beside Francis, whose cold gaze fixed on David. Lynn Marchmont leaned against a bookcase, her expression a mix of curiosity and dread. Rowley, the silent farmer, stood apart, his weathered hands clasped. David Hunter, pale but defiant, hovered near the door, his eyes darting to the portrait. Poirot, impeccable in his grey suit, took the center of the room, his cane tapping lightly on the polished floor. Madame et Messieurs, he began, his voice calm but commanding, we are here to unravel a tragedy, two tragedies, in fact. The deaths of Monsieur Arden and Madame Rosaline are not accidents, nor suicides, but the work of a mind most cunning. Hercule Poirot has seen the truth, and now it will be revealed. A murmur rippled through the room, but Poirot raised a hand. Let us begin with Monsieur Arden, the man from nowhere. He came to Wormsley Vale with a tale that Monsieur Gordon Claude lived, seen in Cape Town after his supposed death. This tale, it was supported by a letter, anonymous, and later by Monsieur Gale, the soldier. But these were not truths, they were lies, designed to unsettle Madame Rosaline, to drive her to despair. Jeremy adjusted his spectacles, his voice sharp. "You're saying it was all a fraud. But why, and who?" Poirot's green eyes gleamed. "Why? For the fortune of Monsieur Gordon, which Madame Rosaline held. The clothes, you desired this wealth, Nan. Monsieur Jeremy, you admitted to drafting a letter to frighten her, in the hand of your brother, but it was not alone your work." He turned to the portrait, its frame inscribed with G.C. 1942. "This painting, by Monsieur David Hunter. It is a key. The canvas is new, painted after Monsieur Gordon's death, yet the frame is old, chosen to suggest continuity. The eyes, they watch, They were meant to haunt Madame Rosaline, to make her believe her husband lived. But it was not her idea, nor yours alone, Monsieur Jeremy." David stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You're spinning tales, Poirot. I painted it for Rosaline as a memory. There's no crime in that." Poirot's smile was serene. "None, but there is crime in murder. Let us consider Monsieur Arden. He was no stranger, but a hired man, paid to play a part, to claim knowledge of Monsieur Gordon, to demand money from Madame Rosaline. When he grew greedy, asking for more, he was silenced. A single blow to the head, in his room at the Stag. And the canvas he left. With the word flood, it was a message, perhaps a warning, of the chaos he unleashed." Spence, seated near the window, leaned forward. "You're saying Arden was part of a scheme, and Rosaline's death connected precisement," Poirot said. "Madame Rosaline, she was fragile, but not suicidal. Her sedatives, prescribed by Monsieur Lionel, were managed by Monsieur David. The vial found by her body, it held a fatal dose, not accidental, but deliberate. The residue in her glass, it was not the mild sedative she took, but something stronger, administered to end her life." Lynn gasped, her hand to her mouth. "You mean she was poisoned?" Poirot nodded. "By one who had access, who knew her habits. Monsieur David, you were seen handling her vial the morning of her death. You lied about your whereabouts. The night Monsieur Arden was killed you were in London, not at Furrowbank. And the maid, Sally, heard you speak of the plan, a plan to secure the fortune non." David's face paled, his voice rising. "This is nonsense. I loved Rosaline, she was my sister. I'd never harm her." Poirot's gaze was unyielding. "Love, monsieur, can be a mask for ambition. You painted the portrait to unsettle her, to make her fear Gordon's return. You hired Arden to play his part, but when he demanded more, you killed him. And Madame Rosaline, she began to suspect, She found the forged letter, perhaps confronted you. So you silenced her, with a dose disguised as her medicine." The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Beatrice's handkerchief fell to the floor. Francis's eyes narrowed, and Jeremy's hands trembled. Rowley, breaking his silence, spoke, his voice low. "Is it true, Hunter? Did you do this?" David's eyes blazed, but Poirot continued, relentless. "The frame, Monsieur David, it was your mistake. The inscription, G.C. 1942, it proves the portrait was a lie, meant to deceive. You chose it to match the fiction of Gordon's survival, to break Madame Rosaline's spirit. But Hercule Poirot, he sees the details, the threads that unravel the truth." David lunged forward, his voice a snarl. "You've no proof, Poirot. This is all conjecture." Spence rose, his hand on his notebook. "We'll see about proof, Hunter. That vial's being tested, and we've got witnesses to your movements. You'd best come with me." David's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he muttered. "Rosaline, she was weak. She'd have given in eventually. Arden was a mistake, greedy fool. But I didn't mean for her to die. I wanted the money, for us." Poirot's voice was soft, almost pitying. The flood, monsieur. It sweeps away all in its path: greed, love, loyalty. You thought to ride it, but it has drowned you. Spence led David away, the clothes watching in stunned silence. Jeremy's face was ashen, Beatrice wept, and Francis's cold mask cracked, revealing fear. Lynn, her eyes on the portrait, murmured, "Poor Rosaline. She never had a chance." Poirot turned to the painting, its eyes no longer accusing but mournful. "The truth, it is a light in the darkness, and Hercule Poirot, he brings it forth." As the family dispersed, the manor seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare. The flood had broken, and with it, the lies that had bound Wormsley Vale in its grip. Chapter 9. The eve of justice. The storm that had loomed over Wormsley Vale had passed, leaving a sky of tentative blue and a village cleansed of its secrets, though not its sorrow. The arrest of David Hunter for the murders of Enoch Arden and Rosaline Claude sent ripples through the community, quieting the whispers that had once accused the widow herself. Furrowbank, now empty, stood as a silent monument to the tragedy, its covered mirrors and watchful portrait abandoned to dust. Hercule Poirot, his work in Wormsley Vale nearly complete, sat in the parlor of the Stag, his notebook closed, his mind reflecting on the human frailties that had fueled the flood of deceit. The Claudes, chastened by the revelation of David's crimes, gathered one last time at Wormsley Heath, their modest home a stark reminder of their lost fortunes. Jeremy Claude, his solicitor's composure frayed, sat at the head of the dining table, his spectacles pushed up as he rubbed his eyes. Beatrice, her handkerchief sodden, murmured prayers for Rosaline's soul, her earlier zeal replaced by guilt. Frances, ever the pragmatist, stared out the window, her face unreadable, while Rowley, the farmer, polished his boots with methodical care, as if to erase the stain of the past weeks. Lynn Marchmont, alone among them, seemed to carry a spark of resolve, her auburn hair catching the morning light as she poured tea. Poirot, invited to join them for a final discussion, entered the parlor with his usual precision, his grey suit immaculate, his cane a steady rhythm on the floor. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice soft but clear, "the truth has been uncovered, and justice, it begins to flow. But there are lessons here, for all of us, Nan." Jeremy looked up, his voice weary. "Lessons, Monsieur Poirot." "We've lost everything, Gordon, Rosaline, the estate. What's left to learn?" Poirot's green eyes gleamed. "To learn, monsieur, that greed is a tide that drowns those who ride it. You sought to reclaim what was not yours, with letters and schemes. You did not kill, but you stirred the waters that led to murder." Beatrice's sob broke the silence. "I only wanted what was fair. Gordon was our brother. He'd never have left us nothing if not for her." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Madame, fairness is not found in deceit. The letter you supported, the witness you embraced, these were tools of manipulation, not justice. And Madame Rosaline, she was a victim, not a villain." Lynn set down her cup, her grey eyes steady. "You're right, Monsieur Poirot. We were all complicit, in a way. I saw Rosaline's fear, David's anger, and I did nothing. I thought it was just family squabbles, not this." Poirot nodded, his gaze softening. "You, Mademoiselle Lynn, you saw with clarity, but the heart, it clouds the mind. You are young, and you will learn. Trust your instincts, not the passions that sway you." Frances spoke, her voice cold but cracked. "And David, he killed for the money, but we're no better. We wanted it too." Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, madame, but desire is not action. Monsieur David, he crossed the line. He hired Arden to play the ghost of Gordon, painted the portrait to haunt Rosaline, and when she faltered, he poisoned her, thinking to secure the fortune for himself. His confession, it spares you further scandal, but not the shame." Rowley, silent until now, looked up, his voice low. "What happens to the estate now, with Rosaline gone, and no Gordon?" Jeremy answered, his tone flat. The earlier will stands, it's divided among us, but it's less than you think. Debts, taxes, legal fees. We're not rich, not anymore. Poirot rose, his cane tapping lightly. The wealth you sought, it was a mirage. The true wealth, it is in the truth, in the order restored. Hercule Poirot, he has done his part. As he left Wormsley Heath, Poirot paused by the river, its waters calm after the storm. Lynn followed, catching up to him, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "you saw through it all, the lies, the greed. How do you do it?" Poirot smiled, his eyes on the horizon. "The little grey cells, mademoiselle, they see what the heart obscures. The painting, the letter, the word flood, they were signs, pointing to a truth hidden in plain sight. And you must rebuild. We not with money, but with courage." Lynn nodded, her expression resolute. "I'm going back to London. The Navy's done with me, but I'll find my way. No more clothes, no more shadows." Poirot tipped his hat. "Bon courage, mademoiselle. The tide ebbs, and with it, the past. You will find your future." He returned to the Stag, where Superintendent Spence awaited, his dour face softened by a rare smile. "You've done it again, Poirot," he said, offering a cigar, which Poirot declined with a shudder. "Hunters confessed, Foulier, Rosaline, the lot. The vial's residue was morphine, not her usual sedative. He swapped it, thinking it'd look like an accident." Poirot nodded, his mind lingering on the portrait. The eyes of Monsieur Gordon, they accused, but it was Monsieur David who could not escape their gaze. The frame, with its date, it was the final clue, a lie, too bold to hide. Spence chuckled. "You and your clues. What's next for you?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "London, mon ami, and perhaps another puzzle. The world, it is never short of mysteries for her." Poirot. As he packed his small case, Poirot glanced at his notebook, its pages filled with the story of Wormsley Vale. The flood of greed had swept through, carrying lives in its wake, but justice, like the tide, had ebbed back, leaving truth in its place. He closed the book, his thoughts already drifting to the next challenge, his little grey cells ever ready. The train to London awaited, and as Poirot boarded, the village clock chimed noon, its notes a farewell to a case concluded, and a promise of mysteries yet to come.